Dr. Emily Carter had spent the better part of a decade carving out a life that was more than just a career, it was her identity. From the first time she donned her white coat as a fresh medical resident, she had known that medicine was not just a job. It was a calling. She remembered the nights she stayed late in the emergency ward, her hands slick with antiseptic and blood, her mind racing through diagnoses as she whispered to patients, "You're going to be okay." That had been Emily. Dedicated, relentless, fearless. But today, all of that dedication seemed meaningless. The hospital director, a man with a penchant for numbers over humans, had summoned her to his office. Emily's steps echoed in the sterile corridor, her stethoscope bouncing against her chest. She thought she had seen everything in her career: unexpected deaths, impossible surgeries, and hospital politics that could crush even the most stalwart souls. Yet nothing had prepared her for the icy shock that awaited. The director's office smelled faintly of coffee and leather. He didn't offer a smile or even a handshake. His eyes, sharp and calculating, seemed to dissect her in a way that made Emily feel like a specimen on a tray. "Emily," he said, voice devoid of warmth, "we can't have you here anymore." Her brain refused to compute. I don't understand," she whispered, though she felt the blood drain from her face. He leaned back, the chair creaking under him. "You're a liability. Your methods, your focus on patient care over costs, it doesn't fit the hospital's vision." Emily felt as if someone had pulled the rug from under her feet. Liability, focus on patient care. That was the essence of her being. She wanted to argue, to remind him of the lives she had saved, the countless patients who would never have made it without her. But the words lodged in her throat, thick and heavy. I've given everything to this hospital," she said finally, her voice trembling but defiant. "Everything, yes," he replied smoothly, "but sometimes everything isn't enough." With that, he gestured to the door. Emily turned, jaw tight, heart hammering. The fluorescent lights of the corridor seemed harsher now, casting long shadows that felt like the judgment of everyone she had ever failed, not her patients, but herself. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped her coat pockets. Every step away from that office was a step into uncertainty, a plunge into a future she had never imagined. The hospital corridors, usually familiar and comforting, now felt like a labyrinth designed to trap her. Nurses paused mid-step, offering sympathetic glances, but Emily barely registered them. The sting of betrayal burned hotter than any physical pain she had ever endured. How could someone she had trusted, someone who had overseen her career, turn so coldly? And then she heard it, a vibration, low and insistent, a hum that didn't belong in a hospital. Emily froze, her eyes snapping upward. At first she thought it was construction or an engine passing nearby. But the hum grew louder, more purposeful, shaking the vents, rattling the windows. It had a rhythm, a cadence that made her chest tighten with anticipation. Curiosity battled with disbelief. She quickened her pace toward the source, the hospital rooftop where the emergency helipad sat. Her boots clicked sharply against the linoleum, echoing through the empty corridor. The thrum intensified with every step, vibrating in her chest. Emily's pulse raced. She had never expected anything extraordinary to happen today, certainly not minutes after being dismissed, but something in the air whispered urgency, danger, and awe all at once. When she reached the rooftop doors, the scene that greeted her stole her breath. A sleek black Navy helicopter descended, slicing through the sky with precision. Its rotors churned the air into violent gusts, sending papers and debris spiraling. Nurses and hospital staff had begun to gather behind her, mouths agape, phones raised. Some patients leaned on their walkers or were carried by attendants, their eyes wide, drawn to the improbable spectacle above. Emily's mind raced. Navy? Helicopter? Why here? Why now? The helicopter touched down with a controlled grace that made it clear this was no routine landing. The ramp lowered and a team of uniformed Navy personnel poured out, their movements synchronized and urgent. Every step they took screamed authority, precision, and purpose. One officer, a woman with a stern gaze and a no-nonsense posture, scanned the rooftop until her eyes locked on Emily. "Dr. Emily Carter," she called, voice cutting through the rotor noise. Emily swallowed hard, her lips dry. "Yes." "We need your help," the officer said, striding toward her. Her tone was clipped, professional, but there was an undercurrent of desperation. Emily's eyes flicked to the hospital director, who had finally appeared in the doorway. His face had gone pale, his usual composure shattered. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The impossible was happening, and he couldn't explain it. Emily's thoughts tumbled over each other in a chaotic rush. Mass casualty, accident, some military operation gone wrong. Her stomach tightened as adrenaline surged. She had been fired, humiliated, told she was a liability. And yet now, in the span of minutes, she was being called to a crisis only she could handle. The juxtaposition made no sense, but the imperative was clear. Lives were at stake. Her mind flicked back to the hospital, to the patients she had left behind, to the floors she had walked countless times. Then she looked up again at the helicopter, the dark metal glinting under the sun, the team of trained professionals waiting for her to make a decision. Her throat tightened. Could she turn away, now that fate had dropped her into something far larger than her own petty dismissal? A sailor's voice shouted from the helicopter, cutting through the rotor noise. "Time is critical, doctor. Are you coming or not?" Emily took a deep breath. She clenched her fists, drawing strength from the memories of every life she had ever saved. Betrayal and humiliation could wait, lives in peril could not. With a final glance at the hospital director, whose expression wavered between anger and disbelief, Emily made her choice. She stepped forward, toward the helicopter, toward uncertainty, toward a mission that defied every expectation of her day. The rotors roared as the helicopter lifted slightly, hovering over the rooftop. Emily clutched her medical bag, heart hammering in her chest, mind racing with questions she didn't yet have time to answer. Who were these Navy personnel? What kind of emergency demanded her presence? And why, of all people, had they sought her out? As the helicopter began to ascend, carrying Emily toward the unknown, the hospital rooftop receded beneath them. The director's figure shrank into insignificance. The thrum of the helicopter filled her ears, mingling with her own pulse. Emily's thoughts swirled with fear, curiosity, and a strange exhilaration. She had been fired, utterly dismissed. But now, in a twist that seemed almost cinematic in its audacity, she was being thrust into something larger than herself, something dangerous, something that could define her life in ways she had never imagined. And as the city skyline shrank beneath her, Emily realized one undeniable truth. This day, her day of disgrace, was only just beginning. The real challenge, the true test of her courage, had yet to arrive. Above the hum of the helicopter, the horizon stretched wide and uncertain. Emily gripped her bag, her knuckles white. Somewhere out there, people were waiting for her, wounded, scared, relying entirely on her hands, her judgment, her skill. And somewhere in the storm of fate that had just dropped her into this impossible scenario, she felt a spark of purpose reignite. Minutes ago, she had been fired. Now, she was about to step into the crucible of life and death. The helicopter tilted, banking over the city. Emily's heart raced. She had no idea what awaited her, only that the world was about to demand everything she had. And above it all, the city, the hospital, and the humming thrusters of the helicopter blurred together, leaving Emily with a single, inescapable question. What had she just stepped into, and would she survive it? The helicopter's powerful rotors cut through the crisp morning air, scattering clouds of exhaust and debris across the hospital rooftop. Emily clutched her medical bag tightly, heart hammering as the city below receded. Her mind spun with questions. Why me? Why now? How bad could it be? Each gust of wind buffeted her, mirroring the turbulence inside her thoughts. Minutes ago, she had been dismissed, humiliated, made to feel worthless. And now she was soaring toward an unknown crisis in the open sky, called upon by people who seemed to know something she didn't. The officer who had summoned her, Lieutenant Commander Morgan, sharp-eyed and stern, walked beside her in the cramped cabin of the helicopter. "We don't have time for introductions," she said, voice clipped, tone commanding yet edged with urgency. "A Navy training vessel has experienced catastrophic injuries. Communications are down. We need a trauma surgeon capable of stabilizing multiple critical patients. You are the only civilian we trust to handle this." Emily blinked, momentarily speechless. The words hit her with a dizzying force. Catastrophic injuries, multiple critical patients. She had worked in trauma wards before, had faced floods of emergency cases, but never anything on this scale, especially not at sea, hundreds of miles from land. Her stomach tightened. I can handle this," she said, voice steadier than she felt. She had to. There was no other choice. A sailor nearby handed her a compact kit of supplies, everything from portable IV fluids to emergency airway tools. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she secured them into her bag. The helicopter pitched sharply, and she gripped the handles above her head. Around her, Navy medics prepared stretchers and advanced medical equipment, moving with precise coordination. She realized that the stakes were higher than she had imagined. Lives hung in the balance, and she had been thrown directly into the crucible. "ETA 30 minutes, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Emily nodded, forcing herself to focus. She reviewed every step of trauma protocol in her mind, imagining the kinds of injuries she might encounter: compound fractures, internal bleeding, burns, concussions. The thought of her own hospital floors seemed absurdly tame now. This was survival on an ocean battlefield, far from any conventional medical support. The officer beside her finally spoke again, her voice softer this time. "Dr. Carter, I know this is sudden, but we need someone who can think on their feet, someone who doesn't flinch at chaos. That's why it's you." Emily's chest tightened at the recognition. She wasn't just a hired civilian anymore. She was the fulcrum upon which this mission would pivot. Her mind raced through scenarios, some logical, others horrifyingly impossible. What if the injuries were too severe? What if there were more casualties than they anticipated? What if she failed? The helicopter banked sharply as it began the long flight over the churning Atlantic. Below, the dark, restless water stretched endlessly. Emily pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching as the waves collided like rolling mountains. She tried to suppress the growing sense of panic in her chest. Out here, a mistake could mean death, not just her own, but everyone depending on her. And then, through the roar of the engines, a shadow appeared in the distance, a massive vessel, battered and listing slightly to starboard. Smoke rose from the deck in thin, curling ribbons, and splintered sections of the ship's railing suggested a violent incident. Emily's breath caught. She realized the magnitude of the disaster before she had even stepped foot on the deck. "Prepare for descent," the officer commanded, snapping Emily out of her thoughts. The helicopter dipped, hovering just above the helipad. Emily's stomach twisted as she adjusted her grip on her bag, trying to anticipate the chaos awaiting her. Around her, Navy medics double-checked equipment, some exchanging grim looks while the pilot's hands danced across the controls, balancing the aircraft in turbulent gusts. When the helicopter touched down, the deck shuddered violently beneath Emily's feet. Salt spray hit her face, stinging like 1,000 tiny needles. The helicopter ramp lowered and she saw them. Injured sailors sprawled across the deck, groaning and crying out for help. Some clutched broken limbs, others were covered in blood, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Emily's throat went dry, but she swallowed her fear and stepped forward, determination stealing her limbs. A young sailor, barely conscious, reached out toward her. "Dr. Carter," he whispered, voice strained, eyes pleading. Emily knelt beside him, assessing the injuries. She noticed immediately the extent of trauma: compound fractures, deep lacerations, internal bleeding. Each second mattered. Every decision would dictate whether these sailors lived or died. Lieutenant Commander Morgan approached, urgency in every step. "We've lost communication with the bridge," she said. "You'll need to prioritize critical patients, stabilize them, and prepare them for extraction. We can't wait. Every second counts." Emily's mind raced, mapping the chaos into order. She moved with precise efficiency, barking commands to the medics and sailors around her. Triage over here. Get the IV fluids ready. Hemorrhage control first. We move the unconscious toward the center. Her voice rang out over the roar of wind and the cries of the injured. She felt the adrenaline spike, sharpening her focus. This was no longer about her being fired. This was about life and death. A massive swell hit the deck, throwing Emily sideways. She caught herself against a railing, salt water stinging her eyes. The helicopter's thrum faded slightly as the focus shifted entirely to the chaos before her. She stabilized the first critical patient, applying pressure to a deep arterial wound, and felt a flicker of hope as he stopped bleeding. But every success revealed another challenge. A sailor pinned under a fallen mast, a young recruit unconscious and convulsing, a senior officer with head trauma barely clinging to consciousness. Emily's hands moved with surgical precision, her mind functioning at an intensity she had never known. Yet her chest ached, not just from exertion, but from the weight of responsibility. She was only a civilian, technically dismissed from her hospital minutes earlier, yet here she was orchestrating a life-saving operation that could determine the survival of an entire crew. And then she saw him, the young sailor who had called her name, his face pale and bloodied. Emily's stomach tightened. He wasn't just a patient. He was the son of someone high up in the Navy hierarchy. One wrong move could trigger consequences far beyond the immediate crisis. She forced herself to focus, placing his injuries above all else. She could feel the eyes of every medic and sailor on her, trusting her implicitly. Emily realized something crucial. The chaos wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Fear, panic, and uncertainty were as lethal as the injuries themselves. She needed to act decisively, to inspire confidence, to restore order amidst the storm. And in that moment, she understood that her dismissal, her humiliation, was irrelevant. The world didn't need her to prove anything to a hospital director. It needed her alive, alert, and capable. The helicopter crew moved into position to evacuate the first set of stabilized patients, but Emily's focus never wavered. She barked instructions, her voice cutting through the chaos. Monitor vital signs. Keep pressure on the bleeding. We move in 2 minutes. Each command reinforced her authority, her competence. She was no longer the dismissed doctor. She was the fulcrum upon which this emergency depended. As the sun broke through the clouds, glinting off the ocean waves, Emily felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The deck was still a battlefield, the injuries severe, but a rhythm had emerged. Each patient she stabilized, each sailor she reassured, each life she saved felt like a victory, a defiance of the cruel twist that had seen her fired just hours ago. And then, as she looked out at the horizon, Emily realized the full scale of the challenge yet to come. More casualties were reported below deck, trapped in the vessel's interior. The storm that had struck the training exercise had left chaos far deeper than what she could see. She took a deep breath, gripped her equipment bag, and steeled herself. The moment was suspended, pregnant with danger and uncertainty. Emily Carter, fired minutes ago, had stepped into a storm that demanded everything she had, and possibly more. She had no idea what awaited her below deck, no way to predict the scale of the injuries, the hidden threats, or the battle that lay ahead. Yet one thought surged above all others. She couldn't fail. Not now, not ever. Lives depended on her. And somewhere deep inside, a spark of resolve ignited. She had been dismissed, betrayed, humiliated. But here, in the midst of chaos, she was exactly where she was needed most. The horizon stretched endlessly, waves crashing and wind howling, as Emily prepared to step into the heart of the storm. The helicopter ramp lowered, and Emily took a deep breath, stepping forward onto the vessel's deck, ready to face the impossible. The moment Emily Carter's boots hit the deck of the Navy vessel, the roar of the ocean and the chaos of disaster assaulted her senses. Waves crashed against the ship's hull with relentless fury, sending salt spray into her eyes, stinging and sharp. Sailors ran in every direction, their shouts competing with the groaning of twisted metal and the intermittent cries of the injured. Emily clutched her medical bag, knuckles white, as she scanned the scene. Every corner of the deck was a new emergency, each more urgent than the last. Lieutenant Commander Morgan was already moving with surgical precision, her voice sharp and commanding over the din. "Dr. Carter, follow me. We've got wounded trapped below deck. You stabilize on the deck while I coordinate extraction." Emily nodded, adrenaline surging, and sprinted to the first cluster of sailors. She knelt beside a man in his mid-20s, blood oozing from a deep gash along his thigh. His eyes rolled back as he moaned, gripping the railing for support. Emily's hands moved instinctively. She applied pressure to the wound, checked for a pulse, and instructed nearby medics to prepare IV lines. "This is chaos," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. Her hospital experience had never prepared her for the combination of injuries, fear, and environmental danger she now faced. Limbs crushed by fallen debris, burns from the engine explosion, concussions, hypothermia from exposure to the frigid water. Every type of trauma she had learned to treat in theory was now happening simultaneously, and she was the only civilian surgeon on the scene. A sailor shouted, pointing toward the bow. "Doctor, over here, he's losing blood fast." Emily sprinted, weaving through debris and stunned crew members. She arrived at the patient, a young recruit, barely conscious, with a compound fracture and a deep laceration across his abdomen. Blood coated his uniform, dark and sticky. Emily knelt, taking a deep breath. "You're going to be okay. I've got you," she said, though she barely knew if her words would matter. Time was a cruel enemy. She applied a tourniquet, clamped the bleeding vessel, and instructed a medic to prepare an emergency blood transfusion. The boy's eyes fluttered open, a mixture of fear and trust shining through. "Dr. Carter," he whispered. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Recognition. She hadn't realized the Navy had already briefed the crew on her presence. She nodded sharply. "Yes, I'm here, stay with me." Every movement was precise, calculated, yet instinctive. Emily felt the familiar flow of adrenaline sharpen her senses. In the chaos, she became both surgeon and strategist, orchestrating the extraction of critical patients while coordinating with medics to stabilize others. Her mind, normally racing with worry over mundane hospital politics, now focused solely on survival, hers and the crew. And then the full scale of the mission hit her. This was not just a medical emergency. The vessel's communications had been compromised, meaning no external help could arrive until she stabilized the situation. They were stranded at sea, the storm above and the broken ship beneath forming a perfect storm of danger. Every decision she made now would ripple across the mission. One misstep could mean disaster. "Doctor," a sailor shouted. "Bridge crew, they're trapped below." Emily glanced toward the ship's superstructure. Smoke curled from a hatch, heat radiating outward. Emily swallowed hard. She had no time to hesitate. She sprinted to the hatch, commanding the medics to follow. The interior was worse than anything she had imagined. Twisted metal and debris littered the narrow corridors. Injured sailors lay crumpled, some unconscious, others screaming in pain. Emily moved with a calm born of necessity, her voice rising above the chaos. "Triage first. Check for consciousness. Pressure on all bleeding wounds. Keep everyone stable until evacuation." One sailor, trapped under a fallen beam, cried out as she approached. Emily assessed him quickly, broken ribs, internal bleeding, but a faint pulse. "We can get you out," she said firmly. "Hold on." With the help of two medics, she stabilized him and prepared him for hoisting back to the deck. The beam lifted, and they moved him toward the helicopter extraction point. But even as one patient was saved, another crisis emerged. A senior officer, the communications lead, was slumped against a bulkhead, head bleeding from a shattered helmet. Emily knelt beside him, checking vitals. He was disoriented, barely conscious, and his injuries threatened not just his life, but the mission itself. Without him, coordinating the remaining rescue would be nearly impossible. Emily's hands worked with surgical precision, yet she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her chest. She was only a civilian, dismissed minutes earlier, Yet she was now the linchpin of this entire operation. Every eye on the deck trusted her judgment. Every second wasted could cost lives. As she stabilized the officer enough to communicate, Emily caught a glimpse of the young recruit she had saved earlier. He watched her with wide eyes, whispering, "Thank you, Dr. Carter, you're saving us all." Emily swallowed hard. Hero, she barely felt alive herself. But in that moment, she realized she didn't need validation from anyone. She only needed to act, to do what she had trained for her entire life. The storm outside intensified, waves slamming into the hull, sending shudders through the vessel. Emily's hair plastered to her forehead, sweat and salt stinging her eyes, yet she continued, moving from one injured sailor to the next. Every patient she stabilized brought a flicker of hope, but also revealed new challenges. One sailor had been thrown against machinery, sustaining internal injuries. Another had a head laceration so deep it threatened permanent damage. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Emily's hands ached, her legs trembled, yet she refused to pause. Every movement, every decision was a delicate balance between life and death. The medics followed her lead, trusting her implicitly, responding to her commands as if they had trained together for years. And through it all, the hum of the helicopter above, the crashing of waves, and the cries of the wounded created a chaotic symphony that only heightened the tension. Suddenly, a young sailor collapsed nearby, blood pouring from a chest wound. Emily sprinted to him, her mind racing. There was no time for hesitation. She applied a chest seal, monitored his vitals, and prepared for emergency extraction. Sweat dripped into her eyes, but she ignored it. Every second counted. Lives depended on her. Lieutenant Commander Morgan approached, voice urgent. "Doctor, we've got more trapped below deck. ETA for extraction is 5 minutes at best. Can you stabilize them in time?" Emily's chest tightened. 5 minutes. Too short, yet enough if she acted decisively. She barked orders to the medics, prioritizing the most critical patients. The chaos was suffocating, but she found clarity in the storm. Every action, every decision became instinctive. And then, a sudden alarm echoed through the vessel, the ship's sensors detecting incoming drones, likely monitoring the disaster. Emily's eyes widened. The danger had shifted from the injuries alone to the very environment around them. She realized they were not just fighting nature and fate, but potential external threats as well. Her mind raced. She could feel the weight of the entire mission on her shoulders. The injured, the trapped, the storm, the approaching drones, all of it converged into a single, terrifying truth. Failure was not an option. She had been fired minutes ago, dismissed by a man who didn't understand her worth, yet here she was, standing at the epicenter of a mission that could define her entire life. Emily glanced at the young recruit she had saved, the unconscious senior officer, and the dozens of sailors depending on her. She took a deep breath, centering herself. Every heartbeat, every breath, every decision mattered. She was ready. The storm, the chaos, the uncertainty, it all waited for her next move. And Emily Carter, dismissed from her hospital only moments ago, stepped fully into the crucible of life and death, prepared to defy fate itself. The deck shuddered again as a massive wave hit the vessel. Emily gritted her teeth, knowing the true test was only beginning. The wind howled with relentless fury as Emily Carter stepped deeper into the chaos of the deck. Rain had begun to lash sideways, stinging like needles against her exposed face, plastering her dark hair to her forehead. Each wave crashed against the vessel's hull with a bone-jarring impact, sending shudders through the entire ship. The metal deck, slick with seawater and blood, threatened to betray every step she took. Emily's boots slipped once, twice, but her hands instinctively grasped the nearest railing. The world was a blur of motion, of cries and splintered wood, of injured sailors being dragged or lifted by medics. She didn't have time to think. She had to act. A young sailor clutched his arm, screams echoing over the roar of the storm. Emily dropped to her knees beside him, assessing a fracture that was worse than it first appeared. "We're going to fix this. I've got you," she said, forcing her voice to cut through the chaos. Blood mixed with seawater on her gloves as she stabilized the injury and wrapped a makeshift splint, her hands moving with the precision of years of training. Every second counted. Every delayed response could mean death. The helicopter thumped above, buffeted by gusts, its rotors slicing the rain as it hovered over the deck, ready for evacuation. Emily's eyes flicked to it for a fraction of a second, only to see another crisis unfold. A sailor pinned beneath a fallen hatch screamed as seawater poured onto his legs. Emily sprinted through the chaos, pushing medics ahead of her, assessing injuries on the fly. Compound fractures, internal bleeding, head trauma. It was as if the storm had amplified every possible medical emergency into a relentless torrent. Her mind raced, calculating, prioritizing. Who needed immediate stabilization, who could be moved quickly, which injuries would be fatal without urgent intervention. Emily barked orders, her voice sharp and unwavering despite the chaos. Triage here, pressure on the bleeding, airway first, move. She felt the adrenaline sharpen her senses, the fear dissolving into clarity. Then she spotted the young recruit she had stabilized earlier, now standing on the edge of the deck, white-faced and shivering from exposure. He was staring at a new problem, a sailor pinned beneath twisted metal, waves crashing over his legs. Emily didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward them, heart hammering, slipping once on the wet deck but catching herself just in time. Every move was a calculation of risk, her own life balanced against the lives of those in her care. The pinned sailor groaned, his voice low and ragged. Emily knelt beside him, assessing his condition. Internal bleeding, possible broken ribs, hypothermia setting in fast. She shouted to the medics, "Get a rope, we're moving him now." Together, they lifted the sailor just as a massive wave slammed into the deck, threatening to sweep them all into the churning sea. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she steadied him, adrenaline burning through her veins. But even as she stabilized him, another threat emerged. Smoke from the engine room now billowed thick and black, mingling with the storm. Heat radiated outward and the smell of burning fuel was overpowering. Emily's eyes widened. Fires could ignite, trapped sailors could be cut off, and escape routes could be blocked. Her pulse surged. The situation was escalating faster than she could anticipate. "Dr. Carter," shouted a sailor, pointing to a hatch leading below deck. "More injured, some trapped in the lower levels." Emily nodded, her stomach tightening. She knew that descending into the vessel's interior was more dangerous than anything she had faced yet. Low visibility, slick floors, falling debris, and the constant threat of structural collapse. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and led a small team below. The interior was a nightmare. Water gushed through fractured piping, mingling with blood and debris. Sailors lay crumpled in hallways, their cries echoing through the confined space. Emily's training kicked in, each step a series of rapid assessments. Head trauma first, airway next, hemorrhage control. She moved like a whirlwind, her voice authoritative, directing medics, calming panicked crew members, and stabilizing the critically injured. One sailor had a deep chest wound, his breathing ragged. Emily dropped beside him, hands steady despite the storm of chaos. "I need you to breathe with me," she said, guiding him through an improvised airway stabilization. Blood mixed with seawater as she worked, but she didn't falter. Every second mattered. Every heartbeat counted. Through the roar of the storm, Emily's mind caught on a critical problem. The vessel's communications officer, trapped in the command center, was vital to coordinating rescue efforts. Without him, extraction and stabilization of the remaining crew could be impossible. She motioned to medics. "I'm going in. Keep the deck covered and continue triage." They nodded, trusting her implicitly, and she moved forward, each step heavier than the last. The corridors twisted, flooded in places, the ship groaning under the relentless waves. Emily had to navigate around debris, exposed electrical wiring, and injured crew members. She arrived at the command center to find the officer semi-conscious, blood trickling from a head wound. Her hands moved quickly, stabilizing him, applying pressure to stop the bleeding and checking his vitals. Time was slipping away. The storm outside battered the ship, and Emily knew they had minutes, maybe less, to get him to safety. As she prepared him for extraction, a massive wave rocked the vessel violently, sending debris flying. Emily was thrown against the bulkhead, pain shooting through her ribs, but she refused to let it stop her. She dragged the officer to the nearest hatch, signaling the deck team. Together, they lifted him up just as another wave slammed the deck, soaking them to the bone. Emily's heart pounded. She had never felt fear and determination so intertwined, one part panic, one part relentless focus. Back on the deck, the helicopter was hovering precariously, waves slapping against its skids. Emily coordinated the medics, signaling which patients were ready for extraction. Each one was a race against time. Each move could be fatal if delayed. She realized the full weight of responsibility. She wasn't just stabilizing injuries, she was the fulcrum upon which survival depended. The young recruit she had saved earlier watched her with wide eyes. You're amazing," he whispered, voice shaking. Emily didn't respond. She had no time for words. Every second was precious. Her hands worked tirelessly, moving from patient to patient, stabilizing fractures, controlling hemorrhage, and coordinating the extraction. And then she noticed something she hadn't expected. Several drones hovering on the horizon, likely monitoring the disaster. Her pulse quickened. The danger was no longer just the storm or the injuries. Someone or something was watching, potentially waiting to exploit the chaos. Emily's mind raced. Every decision from this point forward carried higher stakes. The helicopter crew began lifting the first set of stabilized patients. Emily watched, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. The storm was far from over, the vessel still groaning under the waves, but they had made the first critical step toward saving lives. She turned back to the deck, assessing the next wave of injured sailors. Salt water streamed down her face, her clothes plastered to her body. Her muscles screamed with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. Not yet. The storm demanded more, the injuries demanded more, and the crew relied on her more than ever. Emily drew in a deep breath, centering herself. Every movement, every command, every decision now mattered more than her fear, more than the cold, more than exhaustion. Somewhere in the chaos, she caught sight of the horizon, waves crashing violently, clouds roiling dark and menacing. The helicopter hovered above, the deck a battlefield of human fragility and determination. Emily realized the truth of the situation. They were fighting nature, injuries, and the clock all at once. She was no longer just a dismissed doctor, she was a lifeline, and failure was not an option. And as the deck continued to pitch beneath her feet, Emily Carter understood that the storm outside mirrored the storm of responsibility inside her. She had been fired, humiliated, and doubted. But now, at the edge of human endurance, she had one purpose: to save every life she could, no matter the cost. The wind screamed. The deck heaved. And Emily Carter, wet, bloodied, and resolute, prepared for the next wave of chaos to test her skill, her courage, and her heart. Emily Carter's lungs burned from exertion, her muscles screamed in protest, and her gloves were slick with a mixture of seawater and blood. The deck of the Navy vessel was a chaotic battlefield, and she was at the center of it. Sailors groaned under makeshift splints, medics rushed to the next crisis, and the storm battered them from all sides. Every wave threatened to sweep someone overboard. Every moment she paused risked a life lost. She sprinted toward a cluster of crew members pinned beneath twisted steel from the ship's mangled superstructure. One young sailor, barely conscious, whimpered as Emily assessed him. His leg was shattered in multiple places, blood pooling dangerously. Emily's hands moved with precision, her voice cutting through the cacophony. "Tourniquet, pressure. We stabilize first, then extraction." Her words were commands, but also reassurance, a lifeline in the chaos. A deafening crack echoed across the deck as a broken mast shifted, sending debris flying. Emily ducked instinctively, but a piece of metal grazed her shoulder. Pain lanced through her, but she ignored it, focusing entirely on the sailor at her side. Every second was critical. Every decision, every movement could mean life or death. Nearby, a sailor shouted, pointing to the horizon. Emily glanced up just in time to see another massive wave crash against the hull, sending torrents of seawater over the deck. The force knocked her to the side, and she landed hard on the wet metal. Her gloves skidded against blood and grime, but she scrambled up immediately. The young sailor's leg was still trapped, pinned against a splintered beam. "Help me lift him, 1, 2, 3, Emily barked to the medics. Together they heaved the sailor free, the beam scraping dangerously close. Emily applied a stabilizing splint, wrapped the tourniquet tighter, and prepared him for extraction. His eyes met hers, wide with pain and trust. She whispered, "You're going to be okay. We're getting you out." But even as she stabilized one life, another emergency erupted. The ship's communications officer, critical for coordinating the remaining rescue, had collapsed near the control center. Blood coated his forehead and his breathing was shallow. Emily's stomach tightened. Without him, the extraction of other injured crew members could fail. She sprinted toward him, ignoring the sting of salt and sweat in her eyes, her body moving on instinct. As she reached him, another wave slammed the deck, knocking her sideways and sending the officer tumbling. Emily caught him just in time, pressing her body against his to stabilize him. She checked vitals: shallow, erratic breathing, rapid pulse, and a deep laceration across his scalp. She tore a strip of her blood-soaked uniform to apply pressure, but her mind raced. How could she stabilize him fully with waves pounding and the storm worsening by the second? A young recruit stumbled into her path, pale and shaking. "Doctor, I can help," he stammered. Emily nodded, gratitude flashing in her eyes. "Stay with me. Keep pressure here and monitor his pulse." Even in the midst of chaos, she delegated, trusting those around her to act swiftly and correctly. Every pair of hands mattered. Every decision could tip the balance between life and death. Above them, the helicopter hovered precariously, its rotors chopping through the wind and rain. Emily glanced upward, assessing the timing. They needed to lift the most critical patients first, but the storm made it treacherous. She barked orders to the medics, coordinating extraction points, prioritizing the injured and assigning roles. Her voice cut through the chaos, a thread of calm in a sea of panic. The next patient she attended to was trapped beneath a fallen hatch. Emily didn't hesitate. She slid under the edge, assessing the young sailor pinned beneath heavy debris. His breathing was shallow, panic rising in his eyes. "You're going to be okay," she said, voice firm but calm. With the help of 2 medics, she lifted the debris, stabilized him, and moved him toward the extraction point. As she turned, a horrifying realization struck. Several sailors remained below deck, trapped in pockets of flooding compartments. The storm outside worsened, waves smashing the hull, wind driving sheets of rain into the ship. Emily's heart pounded. Every second spent on the deck meant lives at risk below. She signaled medics to continue extraction and sprinted back to the hatch leading down. Inside, the darkness was oppressive. Water rose ankle-deep in places, and broken electrical wires sparked intermittently. Emily's flashlight beam cut through the gloom as she moved from sailor to sailor, stabilizing head injuries, treating burns, and improvising with what little supplies she had. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she fought it down, focusing on the rhythm of triage: assess, stabilize, extract. She reached a group of sailors trapped in a flooded corridor. One of them, a young man with hypothermia and a deep gash across his torso, was barely conscious. Emily worked quickly, applying pressure to stop the bleeding and preparing a makeshift sling to support his injuries. She barked instructions to the medics assisting her. "We lift on 3. Ready. 1, 2, 3. Together, they heaved him toward the hatch, fighting against the surge of water threatening to sweep them off balance. Back on the deck, Emily assessed the helicopter's readiness. They had evacuated several critically injured sailors, but many remained. She realized the storm was worsening faster than anticipated. The waves were higher, the wind stronger, and the vessel was beginning to tilt more sharply, increasing the danger of slips, falls, and further injuries. Her pulse raced as she calculated the risk. Each additional minute could mean disaster, but abandoning those below deck was not an option. Emily glanced at Lieutenant Commander Morgan, who was coordinating the helicopter extraction. Their eyes met briefly. No words were needed. They both understood the stakes. Emily returned to the hatch, determination solidifying like steel in her chest. She had been fired minutes earlier, humiliated, dismissed, but here she was indispensable. Lives depended on her skill, courage, and relentless focus. She would not fail. A sailor shouted from the edge of the deck. "Doctor, more trapped in the engine room, we need you." Emily's stomach tightened. The engine room was unstable, partially flooded, with fires smoldering near the fuel lines. She swallowed hard, steeling herself. Every instinct screamed danger, but she had no choice. Lives were at stake, and she was the only one who could navigate the chaos with authority. As she descended into the engine room, Emily's heart pounded in rhythm with the roaring waves outside. The space was cramped, smoke thick in the air, heat radiating from smoldering machinery. Injured sailors cried out from beneath debris, water rising around their legs. Emily knelt beside one young sailor, applying pressure to a deep arterial wound. The smell of smoke and blood mingled, assaulting her senses. Yet through it all she focused, moving methodically, stabilizing, instructing, commanding. Minutes stretched like hours. Her body was exhausted, drenched, bruised, but she pushed forward. Every hand she could spare was put to use. Every command was precise. Every patient she stabilized was a victory against the storm, the injuries, and the relentless pressure of time. And then a deafening crack echoed through the vessel. A section of the upper deck shifted violently. Emily's stomach lurched. The storm was intensifying. The helicopter above swayed precariously in the wind. Every extraction, every step she took, now carried higher stakes. The chaos was far from over. Emily's eyes swept the engine room. Injured sailors clung to life, trapped, bleeding, shivering. She tightened her jaw, heart hammering. This was no longer just a rescue. It was a test of endurance, skill, and courage. She had been fired, dismissed, and doubted by those in power. But now, at the very edge of survival, Emily Carter's resolve burned brighter than ever. The vessel shuddered, waves crashed, and the storm screamed around her. Emily took a deep breath, bracing herself, knowing the next few minutes could decide the fate of every life still trapped below deck. The wind shrieked like a living thing, lashing rain into Emily Carter's face as the vessel pitched violently beneath her boots. Every step was a battle against nature itself. The helicopter above swayed precariously in the gale, rotors slicing through the storm, but it was the chaos on the deck, and below that demanded her immediate attention. Emily's chest heaved with exertion, lungs burning, arms slick with salt water and blood. She didn't have the luxury to feel fatigue, not when the lives of dozens of sailors rested entirely on her hands. The deck groaned, the vessel heaving under the relentless waves. Emily's eyes caught sight of a group of sailors trapped near the aft section. Water surged around them, already knee-deep. The metal beneath their feet was slick, warped, and unstable. Emily's heart pounded, each beat reminding her that one misstep could send someone overboard or worse. She sprinted, directing medics and shouting orders over the roar of the storm. "Brace! Keep pressure on the bleeding! Move together!" She reached the first sailor, a young recruit with a gash across his shoulder, salt water streaming over the wound. Emily knelt beside him, voice firm but calm. "I've got you. We stabilize first, then extraction. You're not going anywhere." She applied a tourniquet, checked his pulse, and instructed a nearby medic to prepare an IV line. Every action had to be swift and precise. The storm would not wait, nor would nature's fury. A deafening crash echoed across the deck. Emily's eyes widened as she saw a heavy crate topple, nearly striking another sailor. She lunged, grabbing his arm and pulling him clear just in time. The storm had transformed the deck into a lethal gauntlet. Every second demanded focus, courage, and instinct. She barked orders, moving with the medics as they stabilized the injured and prepared them for evacuation. Then she heard it, a scream from below deck. A trapped sailor was calling out, his voice barely audible over the roar of wind and waves. Emily didn't hesitate. She sprinted to the hatch, gesturing to medics to follow. Inside, the darkness was oppressive, water rising fast, wires sparking intermittently. Emily's flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating injuries, debris, and the chaos that threatened to overwhelm her at every step. She found a sailor pinned beneath a fallen support beam. His breathing was shallow, eyes wide with terror. Emily dropped beside him, assessing his injuries. Compound fractures, internal bleeding, hypothermia setting in fast. "We're getting you out," she said, her hands moving with precise urgency. With the help of 2 medics, she lifted the beam, stabilized him, and prepared him for extraction. Salt water surged around their ankles, threatening to sweep them all away, but Emily's focus never wavered. Back on the deck, the helicopter hovered over the extraction point, battling the storm's fury. Emily coordinated the medics, signaling which patients were ready for evacuation. Each movement had to be perfect. The storm allowed no margin for error. The first batch of sailors was lifted into the helicopter, but many remained, trapped below or struggling on the treacherous deck. Emily's mind raced, calculating the fastest way to reach them without risking further casualties. Then came the next wave, a literal wave. It slammed the deck with the force of a freight train, knocking Emily sideways and sending 2 sailors sprawling. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing a railing, adrenaline surging. The young recruit she had saved earlier was thrown to the side, water washing over him. Emily lunged, pulling him back to safety, ignoring the sting of salt and the ache in her own muscles. Her thoughts flashed to the helicopter crew, hovering precariously above, and the extraction timeline they had to follow. Every second wasted meant more injuries, more risk, more lives hanging by a thread. Emily barked commands, coordinating triage points, stabilizing the critically injured and directing the medics with precision. She had become the fulcrum of the mission, the axis on which survival depended. Suddenly, a fire erupted near the engine room hatch. Flames licked the surrounding deck, black smoke billowing into the stormy sky. Emily's heart skipped a beat. The fire could spread rapidly, trapping more sailors below and compromising the structural integrity of the vessel. Without hesitation, she directed medics to extinguish the flames while continuing to stabilize patients. Her voice rose above the chaos. "Move, protect the injured, keep pressure on the wounds. We're not leaving anyone behind." In the chaos, Emily spotted the communications officer she had stabilized earlier, struggling to stay conscious near the bow. He had been exposed to water and wind, his energy nearly depleted. She sprinted toward him, heart hammering, ignoring her own exhaustion. She knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his chest to monitor vitals. "Stay with me," she urged. "We're getting you out." A massive wave crashed against the vessel, sending debris flying across the deck. Emily was thrown to the side, scraping her shoulder and knocking the wind out of her. Pain shot through her ribs, but she forced herself upright. Around her, sailors cried out, medics scrambled, and the helicopter continued its precarious dance above. Every instinct screamed danger, yet Emily focused on her patients, stabilizing, instructing, and preparing them for evacuation. Time seemed elastic, stretching and contracting with the intensity of the storm. Emily's hands were raw, her uniform soaked and heavy, yet she moved with relentless precision. Each sailor she stabilized was a victory against chaos. Each life saved was a defiance of the storm and the impossible odds stacked against them. She realized that failure was no longer an option. She was the only one capable of orchestrating survival in the heart of this tempest. Then came the hardest moment. A young sailor, unconscious and pinned beneath the collapsing remains of a mast, was in imminent danger. Emily's heart raced. The water was rising fast, the deck shifting beneath them, and the helicopter could only take so many at a time. She barked instructions, coordinating a team to lift the debris while she stabilized the boy. With every ounce of strength, they freed him, and Emily applied emergency measures to control internal bleeding and secure his airway. As they moved him toward the extraction point, a deafening crack reverberated through the vessel. Another section of the deck gave way. Emily's stomach dropped. She had seconds to act. She grabbed the nearest sailor, pulling him clear just as a massive wave hit, sending the deck heaving beneath them. The helicopter crew signaled readiness, and she guided the first group of critically injured into the lift. Finally, for a brief moment, she allowed herself to glance around. The deck was battered, the storm relentless, but several sailors had been evacuated. Lives had been saved, but many remained. Emily's muscles screamed, her lungs burned, and her body ached in ways she had never known. Yet she refused to stop. The mission demanded more, and she was the only one capable of leading it. The horizon was a blur of rain, waves, and darkness. Emily knew the storm was far from over. The vessel still groaned under the relentless assault of the ocean, and trapped sailors awaited her guidance below deck. Exhaustion and fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she drew a deep breath, centering herself. She had been fired, humiliated, dismissed, but none of that mattered anymore. Here, in the heart of chaos, Emily Carter was indispensable. Lives depended on her skill, courage, and unwavering determination, and she would not fail, not now, not ever. The deck shuddered violently, the storm screamed louder, and Emily braced herself, knowing the next moments would push her to the absolute edge of survival. Emily Carter's body screamed in protest. Every muscle burned, every joint ached, and the wind ripped at her soaked uniform like it wanted to tear her from the deck. Yet she refused to yield. She had come too far, saved too many lives, and the storm outside showed no mercy. Waves crashed violently against the hull, sending torrents of water over the deck, scattering debris and threatening to sweep anyone in its path into the churning sea. But Emily's focus was razor-sharp. Each breath, each heartbeat, each decision mattered. A young recruit, drenched and shivering, stumbled beside her. His eyes were wide with fear, but he had survived thanks to her intervention earlier. "Dr. Carter, what do we do now?" he asked, voice shaking. Emily's chest tightened. The question carried the weight of all the sailors still trapped below deck and on the unstable deck above. She knelt beside him for a brief second, adjusting his jacket and stabilizing his posture. "We finish this. Every single life counts. Stay with me." A deafening groan reverberated through the vessel, the metal hull twisting under the relentless assault of the storm. Emily's stomach dropped. The aft section of the deck had begun to buckle, threatening to collapse entirely. Sailors clung desperately to railings, medics shouted orders, and the helicopter hovered above, rotors flailing against the wind. Emily didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the danger zone, directing medics to stabilize the injured and secure the area. She reached the pinned sailor first, a young man trapped beneath a heavy mast. His breathing was shallow, eyes wide with panic. Emily knelt, assessing the situation. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, hypothermia. She barked orders to the medics. "On three, lift together, 1, 2, 3, they heaved, the metal beam groaning but finally freeing the sailor. Emily moved swiftly, stabilizing him and preparing for helicopter extraction. Every second counted, and the storm allowed no delay. Nearby, a fire had ignited near the fuel lines. Smoke poured into the stormy air, mingling with rain and salt water. Emily's eyes widened. If the fire spread, it could cut off the remaining exit routes for the sailors still below deck. She barked commands to the medics and crew, directing them to control the flames while she continued triage. Her mind calculated every risk, every contingency, every possible outcome in seconds. The communications officer, whom she had stabilized earlier, stumbled, exhausted, near the bow. Emily rushed to him, supporting his weight. "We need you to help coordinate the extraction," she said firmly. "Your role is critical. We can't lose you now." He nodded weakly, swallowing fatigue, and she guided him toward a safer position. The storm and injuries had already pushed everyone to the edge, but Emily refused to let exhaustion claim them. Suddenly, a massive wave crashed into the deck, sending debris flying and knocking Emily sideways. She scrambled to her feet, her body drenched, heart hammering and adrenaline coursing through every vein. The young sailor she had rescued earlier was swept toward the edge. Emily lunged, grabbing him just in time, pulling him back to safety. The helicopter above signaled readiness, and she quickly directed the next wave of stabilized patients toward the lift. But the true test awaited below deck. The engine room hatch had begun to flood faster, and trapped sailors screamed for help. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself, and descended once more into the inferno of water, fire, and debris. Inside, the darkness was oppressive. the air thick with smoke and the stench of seawater and blood. She knelt beside a sailor pinned under machinery, assessing fractures, lacerations, and internal bleeding. Her hands moved with relentless precision, stabilizing the critical injuries as medics assisted. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Every second was a calculation between life and death. Emily barked instructions, guiding medics to hoist sailors to safety while she stabilized the next set. The storm outside continued its merciless assault. Waves battered the hull, rain flooded the corridors, and lightning flashed violently through the darkness, illuminating the chaos in stark, brief bursts. Emily's eyes caught a young sailor, unconscious, trapped beneath a twisted bulkhead. She knelt, checking vital signs. His pulse was faint, his breathing shallow. She applied pressure to internal injuries, adjusted airway stabilization, and prepared him for extraction. Her body was drenched, bruised, and exhausted, but her mind was sharp, unyielding. She had no choice. Every life depended on her focus and skill. Back on the deck, the helicopter crew hovered, signaling that they could only lift a limited number at a time. Emily coordinated the timing, ensuring that the most critical patients were evacuated first while she continued triage below. Her voice cut through the storm. "We move now. Secure the injured. Keep pressure on bleeding. Airway first." Medics and sailors followed her instructions flawlessly, trusting her implicitly. Then a deafening crack echoed through the vessel. A section of the upper deck shifted dangerously. Emily's stomach dropped. The storm's fury was intensifying and structural instability threatened to collapse part of the deck, jeopardizing everyone. She made a split-second decision. The remaining critical patients had to be evacuated immediately. She shouted, "Everyone, follow me. Move quickly but safely." The medics and crew obeyed, lifting the injured toward the helicopter with coordinated precision. Emily's hands were raw, her uniform heavy with water and blood, but she refused to stop. Every movement was critical. She stabilized each patient on the deck, giving final instructions for safe extraction. Her eyes met the young recruit she had saved earlier. He nodded, trust and gratitude shining through despite exhaustion. Finally, Emily approached the last group of sailors trapped near the engine room. Smoke, water, and debris combined into a deadly cocktail, but she descended anyway. She worked with medics, stabilizing fractures, controlling bleeding, and keeping the injured conscious. The storm outside battered the vessel, yet she moved with methodical determination. Each patient lifted to the helicopter was a victory against chaos and death. Minutes felt like hours. The storm raged, the vessel groaned, and the helicopter battled the wind. Emily's hands shook with exhaustion, but she pressed on. She had saved dozens of lives already, but the final wave remained, trapped sailors still struggling below deck. She took a deep breath, centering herself, and descended into the heart of danger one last time. Inside, the water was waist-deep. Lightning flashed, illuminating the terrified faces of trapped sailors. Emily moved swiftly, stabilizing the injured, applying pressure to wounds, and preparing them for extraction. She barked instructions to medics, assigning roles, ensuring no time was wasted. Every second was precious. Every heartbeat counted. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emily had guided the last critical patients to the deck. The helicopter hovered, ready to lift them all to safety. She watched as each life she had saved was airlifted above the stormy waves. Exhaustion hit her like a freight train, but relief mingled with it. She had done it. They were alive. And yet, even in this moment of triumph, Emily knew the storm was not finished. The vessel groaned beneath the relentless waves, the wind howled, and the ocean threatened to swallow them whole. But she had proven something undeniable. She was the fulcrum upon which survival depended. Emily Carter, drenched, bloodied, and utterly exhausted, watched the helicopter lift the last of the sailors to safety, knowing that in the midst of chaos, courage and skill had prevailed. But the night was far from over. The storm began to ebb, though the sea remained turbulent, and the vessel groaned like a wounded animal, battered and scarred. Emily Carter stood on the deck, drenched, her uniform clinging to her exhausted body, sweat mixing with salt water and blood. Around her, medics and sailors moved with cautious relief, guiding the last of the injured into the helicopter. The night was still dark, but the terror of the storm was receding, leaving a hush punctuated by shivering breaths, the creaking hull, and the distant churning of the sea. Emily's hands trembled as she wiped water and blood from her face. For the first time, the enormity of what had happened hit her. She had been fired minutes before, dismissed, humiliated for reasons that now seemed petty and inconsequential. And yet here she stood, the difference between life and death for dozens of sailors resting on her skill, courage, and tenacity. Her mind flicked over the night's events, the injured she had stabilized, the sailors she had lifted from near-certain doom, the debris, fire, and waves she had battled. She felt a wave of exhaustion so deep it shook her to the core. Lieutenant Commander Morgan approached, soaked and wind-blasted, eyes shining with a mix of relief and admiration. "Dr. Carter, you did it. Every single life, you saved them." Emily's lips pressed together, words failing her. Her mind was still racing, replaying every near miss, every decision she had made in the chaos. We couldn't have done it without you," Morgan added, voice softer now, almost reverent. Emily shook her head, exhausted but resolute. "No, you all did your part, I just did what had to be done." But even as she said it, she felt a deep, undeniable pride. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to feel it, the truth that she had not failed, had not been powerless, and had, against impossible odds, preserved life. The helicopter lifted the last of the wounded, its rotors whipping the storm-tossed air, carrying them to safety. Emily watched until it disappeared into the horizon, a speck against the gray sky. The crew who remained on deck gathered around her, some shivering, some leaning heavily on one another, all silently acknowledging her role in their survival. Even the young recruit she had saved earlier stepped forward, eyes wide. "Dr. Carter, thank you. You saved us all." Emily nodded, the exhaustion pressing heavily on her chest, yet her heart warmed. Then came the unexpected moment. A comms officer approached, tapping the radio. "Navy Command wants to speak with you. They've been monitoring the operation." Emily frowned, barely having energy for another interaction, but nodded. Seconds later, a voice crackled over the radio, formal and steady. "Dr. Carter, this is Admiral Hayes. Your actions tonight were extraordinary. Your courage, skill, and leadership have saved lives and demonstrated heroism beyond measure. We request your immediate report and a full debrief at headquarters." Emily blinked, stunned. The voice, calm, authoritative, carried a weight she had not expected. Fired minutes ago, now commended. She felt a mix of disbelief, pride, and a deep sense of vindication. "Yes, sir," she replied, voice steady despite the exhaustion. The storm may have passed outside, but inside her, a storm of emotions raged, relief, triumph, and the quiet joy of validation after years of dedication that had been questioned. As the last medics and sailors secured the deck, Emily allowed herself a moment to breathe. The vessel creaked, battered but intact. Injured sailors had been airlifted to safety, fires were extinguished, and the chaos of the storm had finally begun to settle. She allowed her knees to buckle slightly, sitting against a railing, water dripping from her hair. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night began to fade, leaving fatigue so deep it was almost physical pain. Yet even in that exhaustion, she felt a spark, an undeniable truth that she had faced impossible odds and emerged alive and victorious. Lieutenant Commander Morgan crouched beside her. "You know," she said quietly, "you were dismissed at the hospital, and yet here you became the most important person on that deck. No one else could have done what you did." Emily gave a small, weary smile. "I guess sometimes it takes a storm like this to show what really matters." The young recruit approached, still trembling, holding out a small, waterlogged notebook he had carried throughout the chaos. I wrote down everyone you saved," he whispered. Emily's eyes softened, glancing at the names, the tally of lives preserved. Her chest tightened as she realized the full scope of what she had accomplished. Each name was a life, a family, a story, a future saved. She had not just survived the storm, she had made a difference. As the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, casting pale light across the storm-tossed waves, Emily felt a profound sense of closure. The storm outside had passed, leaving the ship battered but standing. The lives she had saved were now on their way to safety, and she had proven to the Navy, to herself, and to the world that courage and skill could prevail against impossible odds. Minutes later, a helicopter returned, carrying senior officers and journalists sent to document the miraculous rescue. Cameras, questions, and congratulations swirled around her, but Emily remained calm, composed, and focused. She answered questions briefly, emphasizing the teamwork, the bravery of the crew, and the collective effort that had made survival possible. Yet in the eyes of every officer and crew member present, one truth was clear. Emily Carter had been the linchpin, the guiding force, the unflinching presence that had turned disaster into survival. Finally, she stepped aside as Admiral Hayes himself descended onto the deck. His gaze swept across the scene, lingering on Emily. "Dr. Carter," he said, voice steady, "the Navy owes you an immense debt. Your courage, leadership, and medical skill tonight were beyond exemplary. You will receive the Navy Commendation Medal and your actions will be officially recognized. But more importantly, you saved lives." Emily's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak at first, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. "I thank you, sir," she finally managed. "I just did what had to be done." But in her heart, she knew the truth. She had not just done what had to be done, she had risen above fear, chaos, and exhaustion to become a hero in the purest sense. As the sun fully rose over the battered vessel, the storm finally a memory, Emily Carter looked out over the ocean. Her heart still raced with adrenaline, but relief, pride, and vindication flowed through her like a tide. She had been fired, dismissed, and doubted, but tonight she had shown the world who she truly was. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe fully, deeply, and without fear. The lives saved, the storm weathered, and the courage displayed would never be forgotten. Emily Carter had been tested at the edge of human endurance, and she had prevailed. The Navy vessel remained battered but afloat, the survivors being airlifted to safety, and Emily Carter, once dismissed and doubted, now stood as a living testament to courage, skill, and unwavering determination. The storm was over, but her heroism would be remembered forever.